What is up, and welcome back to Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. As always, I am your host, Brandon Silvers, talking NFL draft history today, specifically the success of number one overall picks. No time to waste. Let's get into it. Okay, as we all know by now, Cam Ward was drafted number one overall by the Titans in this year's NFL draft. He'd long been rumored to be the number one overall pick. And typically, when that's the case, we hear a lot about that player, but ESPN had already moved on before he even made it halfway to Roger Goodell. Why? Maybe they know something we don't know. Maybe being the number one pick isn't all it's cracked up to be. Sure, it's great for your bank account, but what if the odds for success are stacked against you? I mean, not only are you going to an organization that was bad enough to get the number one overall pick, but it's basically on you to turn that franchise around. This leads to teams rushing player development and throwing these guys to the wolves before they might be ready because, hey, he's the guy. We didn't draft him first to watch him sit on the bench. I'd bet a lot of money that the pressure to force these guys to play sooner has gotten even greater as fans have gotten more avenues to voice their displeasure with organizations, specifically social media, or it turns out anybody can start a podcast these days. And this pressure is only increased when that number one overall pick plays a position that we all think we know how to evaluate properly, such as quarterback, which also happens to be the position that is most dependent on other factors like the system, the offensive line, the running game, receivers, and so on and so forth, which aren't usually going to be great if you end up on the worst team in the league. And it's seemingly gotten harder as time has moved on and as we've seen more and more quarterbacks drafted. From 1983 until 1998, there were 6 quarterbacks drafted number one overall. Since then, there have been just 7 non-quarterbacks drafted number one overall. That 83 to 98 period saw 5 number one overall picks make the Pro Football Hall of Fame: defensive end Bruce Smith, tackle Orlando Pace, and quarterbacks John Elway, Troy Aikman, and Peyton Manning. Manning's actually the last number one overall pick to make the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Now, some guys are still playing or they retired recently enough that they aren't eligible yet. But who's the last great number one overall pick? And what got in the way of the guys who were number one overall picks that stopped them from being great? Let's use the most powerful tool in any sports fan's arsenal, hindsight, to relitigate all the NFL drafts from 1999 until 2013 and see if we can figure it out, starting with the number one pick the year after Peyton Manning, Tim Couch. Interestingly enough, I closely associate Couch with Peyton because one of my first college football memories was watching a game where they both went nuts. Manning's Tennessee Vols won 59-31 behind Peyton's 523 yards passing and 5 touchdowns, but Couch threw for 476 yards and 2 touchdowns himself. Couch was even better the next season for Kentucky, finishing 4th in Heisman voting. So even looking back, it makes sense that he went number one. Why didn't it work out? Well, he was drafted by the Cleveland Browns, number one. We know they're a mess now, but this was their first season back after Art Modell moved the OG Browns to Baltimore. Their head coach, Chris Palmer, had never been a head coach before. They had a roster full of rookies and expansion draft selections as well. And those expansion draft selections didn't work out. Just 3 years later, only 3 of the 37 guys they picked in that draft were still on the roster, and they all played special teams. So not a lot of talent, a coach who ended up lasting only 2 seasons, and they threw Couch out there to start game 2 after watching Ty Detmer throw for 52 yards in a 43-0 loss against the Steelers in game 1. That season went as expected for both the Browns as a whole and Couch. The next season was more of the same, with Couch getting hurt on top of it, and that was pretty much the story for his whole career. He was either ineffective or injured. He saw playing time in 62 games over 5 seasons, including 59 starts. They won just 22 of those starts. He averaged less than 180 yards passing per game and threw 67 interceptions to 64 touchdowns throughout his career. Now, looking back, Couch's college days may have been a bit of an illusion. He put up gaudy numbers, but they didn't translate into wins for the Wildcats, whose best season was just 7-5 with him as a starter. This all looks even worse when you look at who was drafted after him. The number 2 pick was Donovan McNabb, not quite a Hall of Famer, but had a very good career. You can say the same about number 5 pick Ricky Williams, who obviously had a lot going on throughout his career, but a good player at times. And number 6 pick Torrey Holt, who should be in the Hall of Fame. Then you have number 4 pick Edgerrin James and number 7 pick Champ Bailey, who are in the Hall. Bailey is one of the greatest corners ever, maybe the best. Of the top 10 picks, any of those guys would have been a better choice, but keep in mind that Cleveland is cursed. Look no further than the next draft when they again had the number 1 pick. In that draft, they selected defensive end Courtney Brown out of Penn State, or as I know him, Courtney Brown out of Alvin, South Carolina. His cousin and fellow Alvin native Joe Hamilton was also taking the college football world by storm as the quarterback of Georgia Tech. Brown was a defensive monster for the last good Penn State team that Joe Paterno was able to coach without pooping his pants on the sideline. He was 6'4", 270. He ran a 4.5 40 and recorded an absurd 29 tackles for loss in his last season. He was supposed to be the next Bruce Smith. And he had a decent rookie season, coming in 4th in Defensive Rookie of the Year voting. Then he recorded 4.5 sacks in the first 5 games of year 2. But his body started to fall apart. He had a major injury in every season of his Browns career after his rookie campaign before being cut in 2005. He had one final lackluster year with the Broncos before being unable to pass a physical before the next season, which ended his NFL career at 28 after recording just 19 career sacks. Now, that 2000 draft wasn't exactly spectacular. The headliner is obviously Tom Brady, but it feels unfair to say that the Browns whiffed on him when 198 players went ahead of him. In the top 10, though, Brown's Penn State teammate LeVar Arrington went number 2 right after Brown, and he had a better career despite his own injury problems. And then the number 5 and number 7 picks, Jamal Lewis and Thomas Jones, each ran for 10,000 yards in their career. And number 9 pick linebacker Brian Urlacher did make the Hall of Fame, although I would argue that has as much to do with him reminding people of Dick Butkus as it does his play. But nonetheless, there were some better choices than Brown, especially when you look back at how his career turned out. Moving on to 2001, we've got a number 1 pick that still makes sense today to me in Michael Vick going to the Falcons. He was a no-brainer selection after his career at Virginia Tech. Not a particularly accurate passer, but he had a cannon for an arm and he could run like Barry Sanders. He didn't play a lot as a rookie, but after that, it was on. He quickly became the most exciting player to watch, and it was translating into wins too, with the Falcons making the NFC Championship game in 2004. Now, obviously, things fell apart in a huge way with him going to jail for his participation in a dogfighting ring. As a result, he didn't have the sustained career success that fellow top 10 picks and Hall of Famers Richard Seymour and LaDainian Tomlinson had. Fun fact, the Chargers originally had that number 1 overall pick and they traded it to the Falcons so they could select Vick the day before the draft. They used the 5th pick that they got in return to select LT. So obviously a lot of what ifs for Vick's career. When he made his comeback, he was a more accurate passer in addition to everything else he brought to the table. If he was able to make that accuracy jump sooner and he hadn't missed essentially 3 years with the legal issues and trying to come back, who knows? But even with all that, still hard to find much fault with this pick, which is a testament to how great he was. You can't quite say the same about the 2002 number 1 pick, David Carr, quarterback out of Fresno State. Like Couch, he went to a new team in the expansion Houston Texans. Unlike Couch, he started game 1 and the Texans actually won that. Unfortunately, that was the high point in a season that saw him get sacked an NFL record 76 times. At a certain point, I probably would have just gone home. Things never really got better for Carr. He started 5 seasons for the Texans and he threw for more touchdowns than interceptions just twice. He never led them to more than 7 wins in a single season. They actually won 4 or fewer games in 3 of those 5 seasons. Similar to the Courtney Brown draft in 2000, this just wasn't an elite draft class. However, the Carr pick was still interesting. He had one incredible year, but it was at Fresno State. It kind of felt like the Texans just wanted to get their franchise quarterback, so they picked the best one available. No disrespect to Fresno State, though. Now, the problem with the quarterbacks in this draft class, they were all sorry. Joey Harrington went 3rd overall. He stunk. Josh McCown or David Garrard were probably the best of the bunch. And I mean, yeah. The most egregious miss in the top 10 was Julius Peppers, who went number 2. Bryant McKinnie and Roy Williams had brief flashes that were certainly better than any that Carr had. I would imagine every other team in the top 10 would prefer to forget this draft, other than the Panthers, of course. 2003 was better. Southern Cal quarterback Carson Palmer went number 1 overall. Similar to Carr, he only had one elite season, but it was at Southern Cal, and he won the Heisman. Palmer went to the Bengals, who had been a laughingstock for over a decade at this point, but they were actually starting to turn things around. He sat behind veteran John Kitna as a rookie, and he got to learn the system as the Bengals finished 8-8. When he got his chance to start the next season, Cincinnati had huge contributors like Chad Johnson and TJ Hushmanzada at receiver and running back Rudy Johnson. In his second season as a starter, Palmer had a breakout year where he threw for over 3,800 yards and 32 touchdowns as he led the Bengals to their first playoff appearance in like 15 years. Unfortunately, he tore his ACL in that playoff game. Somehow he made it back for the next season. Now, he wasn't that good again until 2015 with Arizona, but he was an above average QB for the majority of his career. Not a Hall of Fame guy, but a solid starter who popped off and had a couple of seasons where he was top 5 at his position. The only Hall of Fame guy so far in the top 10 was receiver Andre Johnson, who went at number 3. With what the Bengals had at receiver, it makes sense that they didn't take him. The other top 10 guy you take over Carson is Terrell Suggs. Other than that, a respectable number 1 pick. Now, I started this telling you that Peyton Manning was the last number 1 overall pick to make the Hall of Fame. His brother, 2004 number 1 pick, Eli Manning, might be the next to do it, as ridiculous as I feel saying that. Eli had a very good career at Ole Miss, and people loved that he was Peyton's brother and Archie's son. The Chargers actually drafted him number 1, but Archie helped force a trade to the Giants. Close your eyes and imagine Deion Sanders doing this. In terms of skill and production, we would probably talk about Eli in the same way we just talked about Carson Palmer, if not for the fact that he turned into the clutchest quarterback of all time whenever he faced off against the Patriots dynasty in the Super Bowl. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. The only thing he ever led the NFL in was interceptions. He did that 3 times. Now, he did have seasons where he threw for a lot of yards and touchdowns, but you wouldn't watch him and be like, oh, that's an all-time great down there. And it's not like he had that aura that we sometimes see in memorable quarterbacks that helps us overlook some of their faults. He was just goofy. He was aloof. If not for those Super Bowls, his last name, and playing in the largest media market his entire career, he's in that Jay Cutler, Mark Brunell tier. One of the players the Chargers got in return for trading Eli was Phillip Rivers, who was picked 4th. He was a better quarterback than Eli. He just couldn't win a Super Bowl to save his life. Larry Fitzgerald, one of the greatest receivers ever, went 3rd. If Sean Taylor doesn't get killed, he probably ends up having a better career than Eli too. This was an okay number 1 pick that's made to feel better than what it actually was. Now, he was better than 2005 number 1 overall pick Alex Smith, the 5th straight quarterback to be picked number 1. Smith was a great spread offense guy at Utah under Urban Meyer. The 49ers drafted him after being spoiled at quarterback for so long, going from Joe Montana to Steve Young to Jeff Garcia, who wasn't an all-timer like those guys, but still a good NFL quarterback. To earn the number 1 pick, they had gone 2-14 with Ken Dorsey and Tim Rattay splitting the starting job. Smith had a very bad rookie season under new 49ers head coach Mike Nolan. He was in and out of the lineup due to his play and injuries, and he threw just 1 touchdown to 11 interceptions. Things only got slightly better year 2 when he was the full-time starter, but he took a step back year 3 when he was hurt and feuding with Nolan about the seriousness of his shoulder injury. Turns out it was actually pretty serious because he ended up missing all of his 4th season due to what they believed were complications from the surgery for the previous season's injury. It wasn't until 2011 under Jim Harbaugh that he started to look like a capable NFL quarterback, albeit saddled with the backhanded compliment of game manager. Unfortunately, the story of Smith's career is either the injuries he suffered or the fact that he was always in situations where he would end up being compared to superstars. This started on draft day. The 49ers were trying to decide between Smith and Aaron Rodgers as that number 1 pick. They went with Smith because Mike Nolan didn't think he'd get along with Rodgers. These guys are both giant assholes, so yeah, he was probably right. Rodgers ended up dropping all the way down to 24th, but he was clearly the better pick. Then, as Smith is finally figuring things out on the field under Harbaugh, who comes along? Colin Kaepernick. He eventually replaced Smith, and he led the team to a Super Bowl appearance. Smith moves on to Kansas City, where he had his 5 best seasons. Who shows up there? Patrick Mahomes. He heads to Washington, where he breaks his leg so bad that it almost killed him. He was able to return and end his career on his own terms after missing a year and a half. But damn, what's interesting is you probably don't take anybody over him in that top 10 if you have to do it over again. It would only have been Rodgers. And I'm only talking about a player drafted that late because it was legitimately between those two for that number 1 pick. So not the worst number 1 pick we've seen at all, but underwhelming. 2006 was more shocking than underwhelming. Leading up to the draft, everyone thought the Texans were going to select either Reggie Bush or Vince Young. If you weren't paying attention, I don't know how to explain how good these guys were. They were college football icons. They can't print enough money to cover what they would have made with NIL. And this was back when teams with the number 1 overall pick could negotiate with prospects because there wasn't a set contract for each draft slot. So the Texans didn't seem to be confident in their ability to agree to terms with either one of those guys. So they pivoted to defensive end Mario Williams out of NC State. The news of them agreeing to terms with him was the first time his name was even on my radar, and I was huge into college football at the time. It seemed like a ridiculous cheapskate pick, but it actually wasn't that bad. He was a ridiculous physical specimen who had a great combine, and he set the then record for sacks at NC State. Despite playing just 3 seasons, he had a decent rookie season comparable to Courtney Brown, then recorded at least 8.5 sacks in 7 of the next 8 seasons. And it probably would have been 8 for 8 if not for an injury in 2010 where he had 5 sacks through 5 games. Defensive ends aren't going to impact the game like an elite quarterback will, so none of the teams he played for had overwhelming success on the field, but he did have a good career, finishing with 97.5 sacks. Certainly a better career than the rest of the top 10, including Young and Bush, who never really figured the NFL out. We always talk about players we thought were going to be good, but ended up being busts. Mario was a guy people thought was a bad pick, but he ended up being pretty good. The very next year, we get to talk about one of those good players who ended up being a bust. Honestly, this was the bust for a very long time. In 2007, the then Oakland Raiders picked quarterback JaMarcus Russell. This was a mess from the start. JaMarcus was good at LSU, and he was built like a defensive end, and he could reportedly throw the ball 70 yards while kneeling. However, as physically gifted as he was lacking mentally and maturity-wise. Matt Millen, who was the Lions GM at the time, and they held the number 2 pick that year, said he warned Raiders owner Al Davis not to draft JaMarcus after he struggled to pay attention during his pre-draft interview with the Lions. Raiders coach at the time, Lane Kiffin, which is a whole nother story, reportedly begged Al not to draft him either, but he did anyways, and his rookie year got off to a rocky start when he held out of training camp due to contract negotiations. This rough start was the high point of his career. He played 3 seasons for the Raiders where he alternated between turning the ball over and drinking lean. NBC Sports once described him as, quote, annually and incredibly overweight, as his weight ballooned up over 300 pounds. He was so out of control that after the Raiders cut him, he started working with John Lucas, the former Houston Rocket turned life coach, and Lucas got so fed up with him that he asked him to leave Houston. Do you know how out of control you have to be for John Lucas, who has been through addiction himself and helped all kinds of athletes battle addiction and turn their lives around, to give up on you? Or any life coach should be like, man, I can't do shit with this. Or for someone to ask you to leave Houston. Do you know how big Houston is? Unfortunately, everything I found says that JaMarcus is still dealing with some of these issues. So hopefully it eventually gets figured out. That makes the NFL draft stuff seem infinitely less important. But drafting him number 1 overall does look a lot worse when you look at who went after him. You could have drafted me and been better off, but the Lions ended up with Calvin Johnson at number 2, followed by the Browns with Joe Thomas, a tackle, at number 3, both in the Hall of Fame. Running back Adrian Peterson should join them soon. He went 7th overall. So yeah, a bad pick to say the least. Maybe that was in the minds of the Dolphins when they drafted Jake Long out of Michigan first the following season. He was elite there, and tackles matter because, as we all know, as Sandra Bullock taught us, you have to protect your quarterback. This worked out pretty much how you expect offensive lineman picks to work out. The first two guys that come to mind outside of the blind side are Orlando Pace, who I mentioned earlier, and Charles Green from HBO's Ballers. He's not even real. You aren't drafting the face of a franchise when you pick a tackle. But that's okay, and he was really good before dealing with injuries on the back half of his 9-year career. In the top 10, you probably would have liked Matt Ryan over him instead, but that's really it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to evaluate blocking, though. I was trying to leave active players out of this, but 2009 number 1 overall pick Matt Stafford is still playing. The Lions drafted him after a good career at Georgia. If you were casting a quarterback in a movie, you'd go with him. The Lions truly earned this number 1 pick by going winless the entire 2008 season. The saving grace was that they did have Calvin Johnson, but that was about it. Stafford started as a rookie and was bad before getting hurt at the end of the season, and he missed significant time in year 2 to injuries as well. However, since then, he's put up great numbers. Now, part of that is throwing to Megatron, of course, but it also makes for an interesting thought experiment. He's the opposite of Eli Manning in that his numbers look great, but similar to Eli, you never really feel like he's winning the game for you. Now, he does have a Super Bowl win with the Rams in 2021, but I'm not sure if we even care about that. If I gave you his resume with no name on it, you would probably say he will make the Hall of Fame. He's top 10 in both career passing yards and passing touchdowns. I just don't think I could bring myself to vote for him. I don't think he's ever been a top 5 quarterback in any individual season. But if Eli gets in, how do you leave him out? In the context of this draft, he was the best player, not just in the top 10, but overall. I feel weird saying that too, but it's true. If 2010 number 1 pick Sam Bradford had come out in 2009, he might have challenged Stafford for that number 1 spot. He had just won the Heisman after throwing 50 touchdowns and leading Oklahoma to the national championship game. Instead, he decided to return to school, and then he hurt his throwing shoulder. Now, that would make most players return to school and prove they were healthy, but Sam once again did his own thing and declared, despite not being able to throw at the combine, the Rams took a risk and they picked him first despite all of that. He earned the starting job over A.J. Feely, and he had an impressive rookie season. The Rams went 7-9, and Sam won Offensive Rookie of the Year honors. At the time, he was just the 3rd rookie quarterback ever to start all 16 games and throw for 3,000 yards. He also broke Peyton Manning's record for completions by a rookie. After that, I don't know. It was fitting that he played for Jeff Fisher for a little bit because he was basically Jeff Fisher in quarterback form with back-to-back ACL tears thrown in there for good measure. He wasn't necessarily a bad quarterback. He wasn't necessarily a good quarterback. He was simply a quarterback. In that top 10, he's probably 7th at best. I take Ndamukong Suh over him, Gerald McCoy, Trent Williams, who will be in the Hall of Fame, Eric Berry, Russell Okung, Joe Hayden. This was a bad number 1 pick, but forgettable bad, not franchise-altering bad. Speaking of franchise-altering, but in a good way, Cam Newton went number 1 to the Panthers in 2011. Probably the greatest college season ever, where he led an Auburn team with basically nobody that was coached by Gene Chizik to a national title while also winning the Heisman. He could throw it a mile. He was huge, athletic, basically what you'd create as a player if you wanted to dominate Madden. Him going number 1 wasn't even worth a second thought. However, you know how the NFL likes to do black quarterbacks. But Jerry Richardson overcame his own racism and selected Cam, and he was good right out the gate. He was the first rookie quarterback to throw for 4,000 yards in a season. He set records for rookie rushing yards by a quarterback in a season and rushing touchdowns by all quarterbacks in a season with 14. Those have since been broken. And he was named Offensive Rookie of the Year. He continued being a very good quarterback until the 2015 season when he became a great quarterback and had one of the most impressive quarterback seasons ever. He threw for 35 touchdowns, ran for 10 more, and he led the Panthers to a 15-1 record as he was named MVP. They lost in the Super Bowl, and we remember him not diving on the fumble, but this was one hell of a season. Injuries caused by his playing style and the NFL's refusal to protect him from hits like they would other quarterbacks eventually took their toll, but his peak was unreal. I don't know if it was sustained long enough to get him into the Hall of Fame, but that 2015 season was better than anything Eli or Matthew Stafford did. I could make the argument for a couple of more seasons too. He would certainly get my vote. And looking at that year's top 10, you'd probably still take him first. Von Miller, Tyron Smith, Patrick Peterson, Julio Jones, and maybe AJ Green all have arguments, I guess. But no matter how ridiculous this man's hats are, I can never forget that 2015 season. Not bad for a guy who was getting compared to Jake Locker and Blaine Gabbert before the draft. Cam Newton, a very good number one pick. Speaking of short peaks, Andrew Luck went number one in 2012 to the Colts. This was building for a couple of seasons as he had back-to-back Heisman runner-up finishes at Stanford. I don't think he would have been drafted number one the year before over Cam, but it would have been close. Everyone loved him as a person. He was smart, he talked like a 45-year-old father of three, and he was generally regarded as the best quarterback prospect since Peyton Manning. What a coincidence for the Colts, who had just decided to part ways with Peyton Manning, and here comes the perfect replacement. He broke Cam's rookie passing yard record, and he led the Colts to 11 wins. And he kept progressing through season 3 when he had a monster 40-touchdown season where he averaged nearly 300 yards passing a game. Unfortunately, season 4 was a disaster thanks to a couple of injuries, including a hurt shoulder and a lacerated kidney, which makes you wonder why anybody plays football. He managed to regain his form the following season, but he had to undergo shoulder surgery to deal with that lingering injury, and that was the beginning of the end. He missed all of the following season and pretty much had to relearn how to throw. He came back for one more good season, honestly, right up there with his 40-touchdown season as his best, but that was it. Luck retired during the preseason of 2019. He was tired of dealing with injuries and rehab, and being a quarterback was taking a toll on his marriage. I read an article where he talked about how much he put into football and also overthought how he should be acting at all times, and it just got to be too much, so he walked away. And this is a guy who, assuming he stayed healthy, which is a big if with his history, but he was on a Hall of Fame trajectory, and you probably still take him number one over the rest of the top 10, which was kind of a mess. Luke Kuechly went to the Panthers at 9, and he was really good, but he also had his career cut short due to injuries. RG3 went second overall and actually won Rookie of the Year over Luck, but then his knee turned to pulled pork. Now he's shucking and jiving on Twitter for the white man. Trent Richardson didn't work out at all. Justin Blackmon is still dealing with the issues that got him out of the NFL after a little more than a season. Stephon Gilmore has had a good long career, and Ryan Tannehill is still playing too, and he's been good, but you probably still go with Luck. The final number one pick we'll look at is Eric Fisher, a tackle out of Central Michigan who went to the Chiefs. As rare as it is for a tackle to go first overall, it's even more rare for someone from the MAC to do it. Eric was the first. Okay, again, we're not going to sit here and break down offensive line play. However, this pick makes a lot of sense in hindsight when you look at the rest of the top 10 picks. The guy you might pick ahead of Fisher is Lane Johnson, another tackle. Everybody else stunk. There were some good players in the draft, the best being Travis Kelce, who was drafted in the 3rd round. But those top 10 picks, I mean, what were we doing? Johnson is the only guy still playing. 4 made it to the 100-game mark. Fisher, Johnson, and Ziggy Ansah were the only 3 to be a primary starter for their team for at least 5 seasons. The last time I played football was my second high school practice when I broke my arm on the tackling dummy. I would have been the 8th best player in the top 10. Fisher was an okay number 1 pick in a bad draft. So there you have it. Drafting a number 1 pick is hit or miss, and the degrees within how big of a hit or a miss it is vary a lot. This is due to all of the factors that play a role in success. We've heard stories about bad coaching, bad rosters, burnout, off the field issues, and so on. Just to be successful, you have to dodge all of that and stay healthy and be good. It isn't easy. Do you think it's getting harder to succeed as the number 1 pick? I mean, we still have all of those factors. Plus, it feels like teams are ready to move on quicker. We didn't talk about the guys who are still active, except for Matthew Stafford, but who out of that crew looks like a potential Hall of Famer? Maybe Myles Garrett and Joe Burrow? So best of luck to Cam Ward. Hey, do you want more NFL draft coverage? Head to the link in the show notes. Check out my blog where I wrote an NFL draft diary talking about everything that I experienced as I was watching the draft. This has been another episode of Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. Appreciate you watching, listening, rating, subscribing, reviewing, and sharing. And I will catch you later.